Hello, hello. Welcome back. We are here today to talk about Daemon Targaryen's visions in season 2 of House of the Dragon. This is partially in response to a video that I know Preston and Carmine are putting out. I haven't actually watched or I guess listened to all of their arguments, but I have a good idea of what they've said. And so this is meant to be something of a companion piece, something of a rebuttal. We'll see how it goes. I think it'll be really fun. So Damon takes off for Harrenhal in season 2, episode 2. We see him arrive later in episode 3, and almost immediately he begins to have visions. And a lot of people dislike this, right? They feel like it has slowed down the season, that it has stalled out Damon's growth and development. He's not doing anything. And I fundamentally and foundationally disagree with that. The phrase that I've been using is that he is speedrunning therapy. So in season 1, we saw Damon behaving in a way that I think could easily be described as childish, refusal to take responsibility for his actions, for the ways that he has hurt other people, avoidance, running away when he gets caught. We see this with Miss Arya when he tells everybody that they're going to get married and that she's pregnant. And she says, I came to you for safety and you put me directly in danger when you played these games with the king. In the same episode, we saw Rhaenyra challenge Daemon to kill her. She says, basically, I have the place that you always wanted as the heir. So strike me down and have done with all this bother. And this is, one of the reasons that Daemon likes Mazaria and Rhaenyra and other women who are willing to stand up to him. It's a precarious position for him to be in. Obviously, one of the central conflicts, internal conflicts for Daemon is his relationship with Viserys. Multiple characters accuse Daemon of wanting to usurp Viserys and take his place. Obviously, that in and of itself isn't true, but he still is or was struggling with this kind of, internal conflict of loving his brother and not wanting to hurt his brother, but wanting the power to maintain House Targaryen and Valyrian customs in the way that he thought was best. It's my way or the highway. I want to restore our house. I want to restore the glory of our house. So there are multiple occasions where we see him refuse to take responsibility. In season 1, episode 1, we have the incident with the heir for the day, and Viserys says, "Did you say it?" And Daemon, looks away and he says, "Well, we must all mourn in our own way." He doesn't say that he did it. He doesn't apologize. It's a cop out. Later on in episode 4, when he takes Rhaenyra out into the city, it's a similar incident. Viserys is confronting Daemon, saying, like, "Look, your family, like, this is unacceptable. Rhaenyra is just a girl." And again, Daemon does not take responsibility for the harm that he's caused and just says, "Well, marry her to me." We see this again when he's confronted about the murder of his first wife, Rhea Royce, that Rhea's cousin, confronts him at Rhaenyra's wedding. And he's basically like, "Look, if you want to inherit Runestone, you'll drop this." And that is ultimately what happens, right? But this is clearly a pattern of Daemon hurting people and refusing to make amends. So that is, in large part, what we are seeing him get over. The other crucial part of his personality and his motivations is an unwillingness to hurt his blood relations. I won't say family, because technically speaking, Rhea Royce was his family, and we saw what happened with that. But his blood relations, right? So Viserys, Rhaenyra, Laena, even later on, when he has a confrontation with Rhaenys, he's unwilling to harm her. And even with Laenor, I think this was part of his motivation, that he was willing to kill a servant to take Laenor's place, but he was not willing to kill Laenor. You know, not only was Laenor his cousin, but they were, brothers in arms. They had developed this relationship, right? So this torments Daemon to a degree. And ultimately, these issues, all of these internal conflicts come to a head. At the end of season 1, we see him have this conversation with Rhaenyra about Aegon the Conqueror's dream, right? This Song of Ice and Fire. We'll get to that. And Daemon is hurt. that he was presumed heir for a decade, and Viserys never shared this with him. But basically, from the moment Rhaenyra was named heir, Viserys confided in her almost immediately that Viserys, perhaps not explicitly, but Viserys decided that Rhaenyra was inherently more trustworthy. And that cuts him deeply. Daemon, despite all of his flaws, was always loyal to his brother and loyal to his house. So, this is the first time when we see him harm a family member, right? It was jarring to see Damon choke Rhaenyra, and this was not a kink thing. This was not a consensual thing. It was violent. He assaulted his niece wife, which is a phrase that I hate. And then the follow up to that, we see again Damon's loyalty come back. That he is frustrated with Rhaenyra, but he understands to a degree that she is grieving. The thing that he's most upset with her about is going alone, right? He tells Rhaenys this. She shouldn't have gone alone. What if Aemond were to happen upon her? And Rhaenys says, then I would pity Aemond. So it's complicated, which I like. Humans are complicated. And, he's a complicated guy. That's why we like him. So when Rhaenyra finally comes back and finally makes her desires known, right? Because Daemon has been feeling very impotent. He was unable to protect his stepson. He was unable to protect his wife when she took off. And, so when Rhaenyra comes back and she says, I want Aemond Targaryen, it's like he finally has orders, right? And this was part of his confrontation with Rhaenys, that Rhaenys says, would that you were the king. You can't give orders. You can't make decisions. And Damon is a man of action. He is violent and he is prone to acting on impulse. So this is exactly what he does. He takes this statement from Rhaenyra and uses it as a justification for a very rash decision. And, so obviously we know what happens with Blood and Cheese. He goes to King's Landing and makes some contacts and, pays these two men to go and kill Aemond, right? Because that's what Rhaenyra said that she wanted. I want Aemond Targaryen. Except that when Cheese asks him, well, what if we can't find him? It's pretty clear that he said a son for a son. And I believe that he meant Aegon, but he wasn't specific. And so obviously, Blood and Cheese use this kind of as a cop out or an excuse to kill little Jaehaerys, a child. And this is deplorable, right? This is something that winds up coming back to reflect negatively on Rhaenyra. So, despite his perhaps internal justification that he was acting on orders and fulfilling Rhaenyra's desire as a mother and as a queen, he is again not only killing a family member, but hurting someone he loves again. And so then in episode 2, we get the follow up, right? We're at the small council meeting and Rhaenyra's lords are saying, this is really bad. This is making you look bad, and they assume that she was behind it, and she's like, why would I do that to Helena? Like this is insane. And then she realizes that it was Daemon, and they have another confrontation, right? So we talked about the first one in season 1, episode 10, about Aegon the First's dream and the prophecy. And now it's, Rhaenyra in many ways has assumed Viserys's position. And this is something that Daemon, takes issue with and he expounds on and says, you are suffering from the same issues that your father did, this indecisiveness, this placating of your lords who Daemon sees as lesser because they're not Valyrian. Interestingly, when Rhaenyra flat out tells him, this was not okay, Daemon says it was a mistake. This is new. We haven't seen him do this before. Now, it's not full on taking accountability. It's not apologizing. It's not making amends. But he, for the first time, is addressing his behavior and is at the very least admitting that he's done something wrong. It was a mistake. progress, right? But as we talked about earlier, he is avoidant, running off to the stepstones, running off to Essos. This is his MO, running off, not taking responsibility, not helping to fix things. And, so this is when he goes to Harrenhal. And there is an argument to be made that Harrenhal is a strategic location in the Riverlands, that Rhaenyra's cause is benefited, from her side holding Harrenhal. The problem is Daemon rushed the process, right? He took his dragon and jumped straight to Harrenhal with no guarantee he would be able to hold the castle. So Damon is very much out of his element, right? That Harrenhal is a place of old gods magic, not Valyrian magic, right? That House Targaryen is fire and blood. Harrenhal is bloody, but it's not fire. And this is something that Simon Strong addresses almost immediately on Damon's arrival when they're having that first dinner together. He says, I know that it was arson that killed, my brother and his son because it's so hard to light fires here. The rain is literally falling into the castle, like in all these areas where there's no roof. It is a wet place on the shores of the God's Eye. And at the center of the God's Eye is one of the last weirwood groves, the Isle of Faces, where, supposedly the green men live, and the location of the pact between the first men and the children of the forest. Literally, Damon is out of his element. If his element is fire, he is now drenched in a place of water, in a place of the weirwoods. And what feeds weirwoods? Water and blood. Yeah. We saw this with some of Bran's visions, and we saw this with Ned Stark after an execution, cleaning his sword in the pool under the weirwood tree. So, we meet Alice Rivers, and Damon has his first set of visions, and we see him, over the course of season 2, systematically confronting all of these internal conflicts. And some of the symbolism is laid on pretty thick, that he sees this conflict between himself and Aemond, his nephew, and, the realization that Aemond is in many ways a reflection of himself. It's a kind of a Luke Skywalker moment, in Star Wars Episode 5. Luke goes into the cave and confronts Vader, and he strikes Vader down, and then, the mask pops off and Luke, sees himself. And this is meant to teach him not to rush into violence, and not to be too hasty in harming someone, in killing someone, that you might think that you're right in the moment, but that's not necessarily the right thing to do. So we see him go into I think it's the library. Rhaenyra is sitting with little Jaehaerys and preparing him for his funeral rites. And, she says, you always leave me to clean up the mess and you run away. So this was the last argument that they had. And in many ways, Damon is working backwards through all of these mistakes and all of these times that he's hurt the people he cares about. And I think the reason that we're seeing child Rhaenyra is that he is seeing the ghosts of the people that he's harmed, the people who he cares about, he's harmed. And throughout this, he is starting to implement the lessons that he's learning. So we see Damon have a confrontation with, between the Brackens and the Blackwoods. And, he initially automatically sides with the Blackwoods because the Blackwoods declared for his house. And this is a no brainer. Something interesting, he tells Lord Bracken either bend the knee or burn. And Lord Bracken turns to walk away. And I was expecting a Daenerys moment. I was expecting to hear Dracarys and to see Lord Bracken burn. And that's not what happened. We cut to Damon kind of, sitting, looking a little defeated. And he's like, I didn't think Lord Bracken would be so eager to die. But he didn't give in to the impulse, and I think that's really important. First, we saw him say to Rhaenyra it was a mistake, and then he didn't kill Lord Bracken. However, we then see him ask Willem Blackwood to act under the table on behalf of the crown. He says there are some things that a king can't be seen to do. And this is a move that very much evokes Tywin at the start of the War of the Five Kings when he sets the mountain loose on the Riverlands, but not flying any banners, right? Because Ned says that I can't charge Tywin with this if they weren't riding under Lannister banners. But he doesn't give Willem explicit instructions, right? This is another blood and cheese moment because, again, he turns a violent man loose and a lot of innocent people die. And again, he doesn't want to take responsibility for this, but Willem Blackwood was riding under Targaryen banners. Again, he has implicated Rhaenyra and made her look bad politically for all the world to see. Borrow a line from the Pink Letter. So when I say speed running therapy, I really mean that. That the dreams are kind of the therapy sessions where he reviews the past behavior. And then in his waking moments, we see him trying to implement what he's learning. And I really like this. We also get a lot of insight into the magic of the weirwoods. I guess Sarah Hess in an interview said Alys is not another Melisandre character. And I know that they disagree with that. I don't. I was never wild about Melisandre in the books or in the show. She's mistaken about a lot of things. And the easiest example I can go to is she tells Stannis, if you go to the Blackwater, Renly will be there and Renly will, you'll be defeated. Renly will defeat you. And so Stannis goes instead to the Stormlands and kills his brother, with then the expectation that he can go to King's Landing and win, and Renly won't interfere. However, that obviously turns out not to be true, that Melisandre misinterpreted her vision, right? Because what she actually saw in the fire was Garland Tyrell wearing Renly's armor. The ghost of Renly came and defeated Stannis at the Battle of the Blackwater. So Melisandre is seeing visions herself, interpreting them badly, and then directing other people. We also know from that chapter that she has in book 5 that she's a charlatan in a lot of ways, using powders and magician's tricks to make herself seem more powerful than she really is. Alys is fundamentally different. Alys is not putting herself front and center. She's not drawing attention to herself with the way that she dresses or the way that she speaks. Like Melisandre, she is counseling Daemon, but it's very much pointing out the ways that he is flawed. And in some ways, she's like a Miss Arya character. She says, when men go to war, it's the women and children, the innocents, who must endure, directly calling him out for what he did via Willem Blackwood. Not Melisandre. Actually, what Daemon is experiencing, I think it is evocative of three things. First is the House of the Undying. Harrenhal is a cursed and haunted place. Harrenhal is full of ghosts. What is dead may never die. The House of the Undying is full of dead people, right? These are the visions that Dany has. And the reason I say this is the House of the Undying is set in a black weirwood grove. That shade of the evening is made from these black trees with blue leaves, the inverse or the mirror image of the white weirwood trees with the red leaves. And we know this, that these are meant to be mirrors or parallels, because Dany's description of shade of the evening is nearly identical to Bran's description of the weirwood paste, right? And both of these are able to unlock the psychic abilities of people who are kind of predisposed toward being green seers or being dragon dreamers. That we know Euron drinks Shade of the Evening, and now he's magic and psychic or whatever. So Danny goes through this progression of images, and she comes out changed. And in Danny's journey through the House of the Undying, she sees it as a victory that Drogon burned the house down, right? And she escaped from the Undying ones who wanted to like vampire her and like eat her heart or whatever. The other two examples that this really reminds me of, Jamie in book 3, he, is leaving Harrenhal. That Roose Bolton says, "You can go so long as you tell your father that I did not order your hand to be cut off. You can go." Because Roose has at this point already begun to form his alliance with the Freys and with the Lannisters, but Brienne stays. And Jamie falls asleep with his head on a weirwood stump or a weirwood root, right? And this is when Jamie has this dream about his mother and his childhood, his relationship with Cersei, his desire for the light, his desire to be a good man. And, ultimately he dreams about Brienne. And it's this dream that causes him to return to Harrenhal, right? To retrieve Brienne and to rescue her, to do the right thing. So this is specifically so the Shade of the Evening and the visions and wandering through the haunted place, the Shade of the Evening and the Weirwood paste, right? The way that this ties together with Jamie is that Daemon is sleeping in a weirwood bed, right? Alys tells him, part of the reason you're having trouble sleeping is that, the castle is made with weirwoods for the rafters, and you are sleeping in a weirwood bed, right? And I've put this forward in a lot of my previous videos and a lot of my previous theories, that we know that the weirwood can't be killed easily, that it doesn't die naturally, it doesn't rot. So my hypothesis is that the weirwood continues living even after it's cut. The only way to destroy the weirwood is to burn it. So again, we're back to this whole Harrenhal is wet. Harrenhal, it's always raining. It's foggy. It's on the shores of God's Eye. Weirwoods. So that's 2. And then obviously the third would be Bran's visions with Bloodraven, right? That Bran is the other character who we see drinking weirwood paste, and then he has his visions that are guided in many ways by Bloodraven. And, in Harrenhal, it is implied that it's Alys guiding Daemon's visions in the way that Bloodraven is guiding Bran. So I know that people really want to focus on Melisandre because they're both spooky women, I guess. But I really don't think that's fair because this ties in so much to these other elements that have nothing to do with Melisandre, who in many ways is not very smart, is a fraud, is leading Stannis astray, right? That another theme, right? And I've seen a lot of people complain about this. What Alys says to Daemon, that people who grasp for power don't make good kings, they don't make good rulers. And what I've been seeing people do is assume the inverse or the converse, that they think Alys is saying people who don't want power make good rulers. And that's not what she said. She said that people who desire power for the sake of power make bad rulers. And so it's not that people who don't want power make good rulers. Instead, let's remember Davos and what he says to Stannis. He says that the Night's Watch is calling for aid and we should go help them. And when Stannis gets to the wall and he's talking to Jon Snow, he says, Davos told me that I had the cart before the horse, that I was trying to win the throne to save the kingdom when I should have been saving the kingdom to win the throne. And so, yeah, Stannis initially like never wanted to be king. And see again another parallel. Stannis is the younger brother, and Robert dies, and so he feels a duty and an obligation to take his place as king, but he also feels that he has a right to do so, right? And he addresses this. He says, "I was thinking of my rights and not my duties." Right? So it's not about, because Stannis at this point does want to be king. So it's not about not wanting to be king. It is, if you do want to be king, you must think of your duties before your rights. And I think that's fair, and I think that applies to any kind of governmental leadership position. I also work for the government. We are called civil servants. Servants. We're paid taxpayer money to serve the public. We have a duty. So I haven't even talked about the visions themselves. This has been a lot of buildup. I think we can get into the visions now. I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. There's probably more. Let me know in the comments if there's anything you think I missed, but I think we're getting there. There will be some spoilers at the end. So going through Damon's other visions, right? We see him cut down Rhaenyra. He also has waking visions. He sees Lena, and this is actually a moment where Damon began to do right. That he's faced with the same dilemma that Viserys was, and he's told, "Your wife is gonna die." Basically, the child might live if we give her a C-section, but she's not going to survive that either. Your wife, Lena. And unlike Viserys, Damon values the living family member before him, and he says, it's up to her. And they've just had this conversation that Lena says, "I want to die a dragon rider's death." And that is exactly what she does. And he tries to stop her. He loves her. But ultimately, Lena goes to Vhagar and dies. And the way that they portray the aftermath in the show is, again, Daemon running off. He closes himself off from his daughters and from his duty that now is a single father. It is his duty to care for his daughters, and he doesn't kick them out of the house, but he runs away. These are icky feelings. I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to deal with the responsibility. So he runs away back to Westeros, and we see Rhaenys kind of take over caring for her granddaughters, because Rhaenys, and this is why Rhaenys is the queen who never was, and this is why a lot of people feel that Rhaenys should have been queen, not because she was older than Viserys, not because her father was the first son, but because Rhaenys values duty. And in a lot of ways, she's the best parts of Viserys and Daemon. Willing to act, willing to be decisive, but not impulsive and not selfish. We love Rhaenys. So, there is a moment in passing where Daemon sees Lena. And because Daemon has run away to Harrenhal, for this purpose, right, of wanting to strategically place himself for the war, uh, he can't run away from here now because that would be defeat. And that might have been the best move for him to make. And I said this before, Daemon could have left Harrenhal with Sir Simon Strong in charge. He could have gone to Riverrun and effectively set up a regent for Lord Tully so that somebody could be making decisions on his behalf. And there was a beautiful, beautiful statement that he made. He said, "These river lords should be respecting their liege lord, no matter what state he's in, and he's clearly thinking of Viserys, right? And the indignities that Viserys suffered and the ways that people took advantage and disrespected Viserys once he, really fell ill. It's a really touching moment from Daemon. But he could have gone and dealt with Riverrun, as the king. He could appoint a regent as king consort. He could have gone to the twins like Jace did because, they've got the biggest army. And he knows that the Northerners are going to be coming south and that they're going to need to access the Riverlands, right? So allying with the Freys in some ways is more important than taking Harrenhal, right? He almost literally put the cart before the horse. He took Harrenhal with no plan, no way to hold it, and no defense in the rear. And leaving Dragonstone in a very precarious position, as we saw with Rook's Rest. So he's dealing with all of this. I keep coming back to, I guess, I'm not avoiding the visions, but I that's what it is. I want to set up my discussion of the visions in their proper context. So the really controversial scene in Damon's visions is obviously this Oedipus moment, right, where he realizes that he's having sex with his mom, which is, I hate it. I hate it. I never want to watch it again. But it is informative of a few things, right? That obviously Alyssa looks like a young Rhaenyra. You know, she looks like the little blonde-haired girl that Mizaria asked. You know that in season 1, episode 1, when Daemon is having trouble performing, Mizaria says like, "Oh, do you want a young blonde-haired girl?" Right? So Alyssa in some ways had, the dragon blood or the wolf blood, as some of you may know. I believe that Alyssa was actually a Stark bastard. We can get into that another day. But, this very classic, you are attracted to what you know and what, a lot of men know is their mother, which I hate saying. Ugh. Uh, but then the other is Viserys' statement to Daemon about, you were her favorite, right? And I talked about this in that episode breakdown, so I don't want to get into it too much. But it is again Daemon wrestling with his relationship to Viserys. That Viserys remembers Alyssa, but felt that Daemon was the favorite, and Daemon doesn't remember Alyssa, and then is jealous that Viserys is had more time with her, right? And so, I think a lot of the reason that Damon desires the love of his family is that he lost his mother, right? And that has been like a theme of this entire show of like, we need mommy, right? Even as adults, there are moments when we need mommy. And what do you do when mommy's not there or mommy can't help you anymore, right? It's part of growing up, that it makes the world a much darker and scarier place, like Harrenhal or Dragonstone. So, again, Viserys has been haunting the background of this entire season. And the next visions that Daemon has, now instead of grappling with his relationship with Viserys through Rhaenyra or, through the decision he made with Laena, or his relationship with his own daughters and his position as a parent, it is now directly with Viserys, right? And he's gone all the way back to that first confrontation that we see, and Viserys says, "Did you say it?" And Daemon tries to run away, and the doors won't open, right? Harrenhal is not letting him run away anymore. And so he is forced to admit what he did and understand the pain that he caused Viserys by saying what he said, and more so by avoiding, by running away. That what Viserys said to him was, instead of being by my side or by Rhaenyra's, you went to hang out with your whores and your lickspittles, right? And what's not expressed is, as king, Viserys doesn't really have anybody he can confide in. Otto, to a degree, will keep his secrets, and Lionel Strong is very intelligent and trustworthy. But Daemon is the only adult in Viserys's life who he can confide in terms of his emotions, his grief for his dead wife, and perhaps if Daemon had been there for his brother, there wouldn't have been room for Alicent to come in and comfort Viserys. That in some ways, Daemon dug his own grave by running away. Viserys needed a shoulder to cry on, and Daemon wasn't there for him, despite his proclamation of, I want to be there for you. I want to be your hand. 10 years and not once have you asked me to be your hand. Why would I ask you to be my hand when you can't be here when I need you the most? It's touching. It's deep. It fucking cut me to pieces. But Damon is finally understanding this, right? And then kind of the final piece is Damon grappling with this, do you want the crown? Because that's ultimately where the conflict leads with Rhaenyra. That everyone is accusing him of wanting to take her throne, just like they did when they accused him of wanting to take Viserys' throne and kill his brother and usurp him and take his place. And Daemon has been adamant, much like he was with Viserys. No, I'm going to take King's Landing and be the hero. And then Rhaenyra can join me and we will rule side by side. And I think he means that in the same way that I think he meant that he would have been content to be Viserys' hand so long as Viserys was alive. That he didn't want to be king by himself, wanted to be the power behind the throne. He wanted to be a good partner. But in order to do that, in order to be supportive, you have to understand what it is that other people need. You have to have empathy. You have to have a forethought. You have to have patience, understanding of the bigger picture, understanding that your actions have consequences, being willing to take responsibility for your actions and their consequences, being willing to make amends, and being willing to accept the fact, that sometimes people won't forgive you. And in order to be a good husband and be a good king, these are all things that he has to recognize and internalize, right? And so, again, when I say that he's speedrunning therapy, it's very much like Jamie, where all of a sudden, this cognitive dissonance of being a knight and being a Kingsguard and swearing these vows and loving Cersei, and what does all of this really mean? And growing up. I don't think this was a waste of time. I think this is an example of beautiful, thoughtful, touching, and emotionally intelligent, well-written television. I guess this is where I'm going to get into the spoilers. As some of you may know, there were some leaks. I'm not going to take them super seriously. From here on out, there will be spoilers. Just heads up. Spoilers for both what happens in the books and this leak for the season finale. Part of the reason that people, or the people who aren't Sarah Hess, are comparing Alys to Melisandre is that I guess in this leak, Alys is giving a vision to Daemon, and it's direct. And Daemon sees, I guess, the Night King and the rebirth of the dragons, and people are really upset. They're saying like, oh, they're dragging the Night King back into this, and they're trying to evoke season 8 of Game of Thrones too much. Yes and no. I actually didn't watch season 8. I only watched Glidus's piss takes, but I feel like I got the gist. Yes, the whole idea with the Night King was not fleshed out. Arya killing the Night King was fucking dumb. The notion of an existential threat is warranted, I think. It gives the Targaryens a motivation and a purpose, right? Because typically it's not that the Valyrians wouldn't want to have a part of Westeros, but Valyrian history and culture was more about setting up these outposts, right? And the culture in many ways could persist on its own. The Targaryens had been on Dragonstone for generations. And so why did Aegon decide to take Westeros and, turn it into one kingdom? Why was Jaehaerys so dead set on, being the conciliator and having a uniform set of laws and expectations? It doesn't jive with Valyrian culture as we understand it. The Valyrians saw themselves as a people apart and above other men. So why would you want to integrate with the Andals and the First Men? Why would you create a house sigil, right? Because this wasn't something the Valyrians did. This was a Westerosi thing. Why would you be willing to kowtow to the faith of the Seven? Unless you had another purpose, right? A distinctly, perhaps, un-Valyrian purpose. So, in terms of the dragon dreams, right? A lot of people have hypothesized that the Targaryens who think that they can birth dragons were actually seeing Daenerys birthing the dragons, right? So this fits in really with what's in the books, right? That we think Aegon the Fifth, Egg, might have dreamed of Daenerys, and that's why he did what he did at Summerhall. So that part of the vision, I think, is totally fine. In terms of the Night King, it's not my favorite. I don't actually like Game of Thrones, the show. Season one was really good, but it was really good because the show was initially intended to be a set of miniseries. That season one of Game of Thrones is nearly copy and pasted from the book. That like the best dialogue and the best scenes are the ones that are just the book, right? So the farther we get from the books, the more I hate the show. And something I want to say, departure from the books is not the issue. That there are a lot of changes in House of the Dragon that I like. My issue with Dave and Dan is they made changes from the books for no reason that made no sense and made the show worse. So, going all the way back to the beginning of our discussion in this video, the confrontation between Daemon and Rhaenyra is based in Viserys confiding about Aegon's dream to Rhaenyra. And now that Daemon has done all of this therapy and all of this growth and understanding into empathy and accountability and all that happy shit, that now he is given access to Aegon's dream in a way that other worthy Targaryens have been, like Aegon the Fifth. So, in order to reconcile with Rhaenyra, he had to do all these other things, all that accountability and whatnot. But he needed to deal with this underlying issue of jealousy over the fact that Viserys confided in Rhaenyra, and that Daemon, for the first time, actively harmed a family member over it. And now that he's kind of earned access to this vision, that he understands now why Viserys and Rhaenyra did what they did and are doing what they're doing. That I think at this point now he's willing to accept duty. And there's a lot more I could say about Daemon. I could probably talk for hours, but it's very late and I need to go to bed. Shout out to my top tier patrons on Patreon, Aiden, Zach from the club, and Tom Silver. You guys are very much appreciated. All of my patrons are appreciated. And just to let you all know, there is a free tier on my Patreon as well. If you want to sign up for updates, I appreciate the likes and the subscriptions and the comments and all the positive interactions. I love reading your thoughts. Hopefully I'll see you on Discord, over on Twitter. And yeah, let me know what you think of Daemon. Let me know what you think of the video. And of course, please go and watch Carmine and Preston's video, and you can hear all of their takes about these leaks and about Daemon and all that stuff. Anyway, catch you next time.